Today, I'm going to show you how I do a cluster lens restoration. So right now, we're going to be focusing on the Nissan clusters from about 1980-ish to all the way up to about 2004. Basically, if you see a lens, which is this plastic piece that goes over the actual gauges, then your Nissan is applicable to this process. Right now I've got the opportunity to be working on a couple rare clusters here in America. I've got a Nissan GTR R33 cluster, and I also have a Nissan GTR R33 Nismo Edition cluster. Both have overspray on the lens and they're pretty well swirled up and they're needing of restoration. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Alrighty, so this is what we're going to need to get our project started. First, I've laid down a couple soft towels to protect the electronics on the backside of these clusters. You're going to need some fresh nitrile or latex gloves, a couple soft towels, high density microfiber preferably, and a ultra soft brush. Now after we get the lens off, we're going to need to wet sand it and then have a means of polishing it. I'll show you that later in the video. As you can see, I've opted to do this indoors as the chances of getting dust inside the cluster are significantly lower. First, you want to identify how we're going to take this cluster apart. Get familiar with its design. Now luckily we're not going to be messing with any of the electronics in the back unless you want to change out any light bulbs, but you do want to be careful and not damage anything back here. The first step we want to take is to identify all the clear plastic tabs that go around this cluster. You want to make sure and not remove any of these black ones unless you find it necessary for further cleaning. So keep in mind that this cluster is about 22 years old, so the plastic can become quite brittle. So you want to be very careful with the removal process and take your time. And of course, with other clusters, they can be significantly older. Here's a close-up shot of the damage that we're going to be removing. As you can see, there's a bunch of swirl marks and it's a little hazy from overspray. To get started with the process, I'd like to dust off the area around it to make sure that dust doesn't get inside of anything. Ultimately, when you're working on things, dust will get where you don't want it, but that's why we have this ultra soft brush in order to flick it out of the way. The reason why I wear gloves is to reduce any chances of oil spotting from your fingerprints. Rubbing off hand oil can drastically increase the chances of scratching something if you're trying to wipe it off with a rag. Next, we want to carefully press down on the tabs in order to release the lens. Now what I do is with one hand I'll press the tab and with the other hand I'll grab the lens and lightly pull outwards. Now it can be a little tricky because these tabs are going to want to pop back in while you're getting other tabs, so it's a little bit of a juggling act. As you can see right there, it just did it. So I'm going to take my time, go off camera, and I'll come back to you when this lens is off. Okay, that wasn't so bad. What I ended up doing was putting it in my lap and sitting down. And I got my plastic pry tools, and it's important that you use a plastics tool instead of maybe a screwdriver or a butter knife, because if in the case that you do accidentally slip, you're not going to scratch the surface. Now, this should come off pretty easy. There we go, yep. And that's your lens for you. The lens just comes right out, and what you want to do now is get a clean cloth and place it over your cluster. You're going to be very careful and not touch anything in here, just in case any oil did get on your gloves. You don't want to accidentally put fingerprints and risk rubbing something. It's very easy to get lint and dust in here, and we want to preserve the originality of the way this looks. Okay, now that we have this all covered off, we know that it'll be okay for a little while. Now what we're going to do is take our lens and then we're going to go wet sand it, then polish it to a high luster to make it look just as good as new. I've gone ahead and done the same thing to the GTR cluster. Both lenses are now removed and ready to be restored. Here's a view of the non-Nismo GTR lens. You can see this one doesn't have very much overspray, but it is pretty well swirled up. There's a bad spot right there. Now this next part is somewhat optional. I've chosen 3M 3000 grit sandpaper. Now this is a nice thick sandpaper that has a foam in between, so it reduces the chances of pressing too hard down in any areas. This will give you a nice even finish. If you're not comfortable with using sandpaper, you can just go ahead and skip to the polishing process. Now the results might not come out as good, but if you're not comfortable with it, then that's the way to go. And as a side note, I wouldn't recommend using anything coarser than 3000 grit. Maybe even use 5000 if that's what you prefer. So now what I'm going to use is some warm soapy water to help lubricate the sanding process. Mist down the lens and then wet your sandpaper. I like to fold it so it distributes the pressure more evenly. Now, gently sand. Make sure you don't sand in one spot, as you want to make sure it's sanded evenly throughout. I can immediately tell that I'm sanding off overspray. Listen, you hear that? That's overspray. You can come over here and it's quiet. So that's a good thing. This is part of the refinement process. Now what sanding does is actually takes down a layer off of your plastic and it removes it, but it also makes it smoother. If you need to, go to the sink and rinse this off and do one more pass of sanding. Okay, that's rinsed off, and now I'm gonna wipe off the sanding water with a soft, clean microfiber towel. And what you wanna do is inspect it to see if there's any residual scratches. Now that may not make sense because you're obviously inducing a lot more scratches. As you can see, it looks significantly worse. But I can see, I'm not sure if you can see it in the video, but there's still some scratches around here that I need to take care of. So we start the process over again. Now you want to make sure you're not using too much pressure as you're actually pushing down on all of these tabs, and you don't want to break them by pressing down too hard. Okay, now let's wipe this off and check again. Okay, now let's see if we can get this in a little bit closer. You can see that there's still scratches here from people pressing the reset button on the odometer. We still want to get those out. Okay, so I went ahead and did the process just one more time, and you can see that the scratches, though there are some tiny little ones you can see right there, right by the hole, this will still yield nice results. We're looking at about a 95% correction here as far as sanding goes. Okay, as you can see, both lenses have been wet sanded and now they're producing nice satin finish. This is what you're looking for. Now let's go to the polishing process. Okay, so now we've moved to the garage. This is my trusty old polisher. It's a bench grinder, but I've put an ultra soft polishing wheel on it, and I've already gone ahead and removed the stone wheel just in case, because you don't want to accidentally touch the lens to the stone. If you don't have access to a bench grinder, you can always do it by hand. Now this is a drill with a soft foam pad, and you can always use a polishing compound or a polish made by Meguiar's called Plastex. Today we're going to be using this polishing stick and the soft polishing wheel on the bench grinder. Keep in mind that this style of polishing can be significantly more dangerous as it's easier to burn through the plastic, but with enough practice it can yield very nice results. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses when you're doing this, as things will go flying. Now I'm not going to go into the specifics on how to polish with this style polisher, but I'll give you the rundown. This is my trusty old polisher, so it's probably going to be making some funny noises, but she gets the job done. You'll want to turn on the machine and clean the pad before you start taking it to any plastic, just to make sure there's no foreign debris left inside of this pad from previous polishing jobs. Jabbing it like you're angry at it is the best way to clean your pad. At least that's my opinion. Now let's go ahead and get our polish right here. It's a hard compound stick, and we'll just rub it straight onto the pad. Then you can begin your polishing process. You can see a progressive shot here, 50-50. This is obviously the side that was wet sanded and this is the side that's polished. You can also see that there's still some small marks left behind from the polishing process. We can either get these out by hand or using that foam pad on the drill. For this next polishing step, I've chosen to use CarPro Essence. If you like the way it looks and you'd like to get your hands on a bottle, scroll down and I'll post a link so you can buy it. Next, you want to wipe it off with a soft microfiber cloth and inspect your finish. Okay, so I know I said I wouldn't use this, but I actually do like the results that this system is yielding. As you can see, when I was outside, I used the bench grinder to polish this side, but it was leaving some micro abrasions. So I went ahead and moved to the next step with a finer polish and a softer foam pad. Here you can see the results. It's looking nice and clear over here. And we've got the unfinished side. But I did do a test spot right here with the foam pad and the CarPro Essence. This combination seems to be a good option. Now I'm almost finished with the polishing process, but there's one tip that I'd like for you to see. If your pad is spinning this way, you want to make sure that it flicks offward. Be careful that the pad doesn't come close to the other edge. It can catch and accidentally shoot your plastic and you could damage something. So make sure you stay at least an inch away from the opposite edge of where it's spinning. And if you need to get to the other edge, either you can reverse your drill or you can simply turn the lens around and begin polishing that way. Now, as you might have guessed, polishing is a little bit of an art form, so you're going to have to wipe it off, check your results, and then potentially repeat the polishing process until you find the results you're happy with. And there we have it. One freshly restored lens and the other one that has been wet sanded. What a difference. Now, these are used lenses, so it's possible that things won't come out exactly like brand new, but I've done my absolute best and we're looking at about a 90 to a 95% correction rate here. In my book, that's pretty damn good. As you can see, almost all of the swirl marks are gone and there's absolutely no overspray left. That looks great. Our next step is to prepare the cluster to install the lens. As you can see right here, there's some dust that has either fallen in from the reset knob or it's been worn off from the plastic. Either way, we're going to need to carefully remove that. With our fine brush, you want to make sure that it's clean and there's no dust inside of it. Feel free to use compressed air. You can also use compressed air on here, but you want to be sure that you're not doing more harm than good. So what we'll do is I'll take it this way and tilt it down and just flick that dust out of there. And I'll go ahead and get the whole bottom. And there you go, good as used. At this stage, you want to make sure that the inside of your lens is fingerprint and smudge free as well as dust free, as you won't be able to get to it anymore. This looks good. But before you do that, now is a good time to reset your odometer. I'm just kidding, don't do that. So what we're going to do is line up this hole with that knob, place that in there first, and then make sure that all the tabs line up and go inside of their respective holes. Okay, so that looks good. At this part, you want to press from the inward side to outward, just like this. And that is one nicely completed cluster. Thanks for watching this video, and hopefully you learned something. And even if you didn't, you should still smash that like button and subscribe to my channel.